So, Crosswind. This is an ambitious free-to-play action combat pirate-themed procedurally generated sandbox survival crafting MMO lite that you didn't know you wanted, but once you start playing, you can't put it down. Crosswind recently entered its alpha phase of development, and I was lucky enough to be chosen to test the game. And wow, I can't believe this game is in alpha. I've seen betas and early access games and even full release games that are more buggy, have less content, and perform worse. Now, with that being said, Crosswind is procedurally generated pirate Valheim that allows for a deeper multiplayer experience. Basically, everyone is given a random world where your progress is account-wide. However, there's a main player hub known as Tortuga where you can trade and meet up with others and even venture out together to participate in PvE or PvP. And yes, PvP will include both ship and ground PvP. Crosswind has really only been on my radar for a couple of months at this point, and both the quality and the amount of content I've seen thus far from my 10 or so hours of playing the alpha is massively impressive. The developers have said in an AMA interview on Reddit that they won't be crossing the line from pay to convenience to pay to win, and that they're using Path of Exile as an inspiration in regards to its monetization. Even going so far as to say that they think a good game will generate a lot of players and that itself will generate revenue. It sounds good to me. I think this game has a ton of potential, but without any further ado, let me take you through my time and experience with the Crosswind Alpha. So, to start things off, as you enter the game, you're immediately greeted with pirate creation. The creation right now is pretty standard, plenty of sliders and options for tattoos, which is absolutely necessary because imagine being a pirate without tattoos. After my character looked exactly like my binder from 6th grade that I drew on when I didn't want to pay attention in class, and I was sufficiently happy with his face and proportions, I clicked create and named myself Waydot. I pressed play, and the first time you load into the game, it obviously takes a little bit longer as your world is being generated for the first time. It's important to note that while everyone's experience will be unique due to the randomly generated world, some of the quest objectives and important parts of progress are handpicked and placed. This is a good thing. You can imagine if someone's quest objective was right beside their spawn and then their friend had to sail halfway around the world to get to the same thing, this might create a disparity between people's experiences. Anyway, you're first spawned onto a ship that's currently being attacked, and you're given some descriptive information about the story before being shown your action bar, which features 8 slots, and in the first slot you have a saber, which is your weapon. It's click to attack or middle mouse wheel to heavy attack, and you can hold the right button to block. I opened up my inventory and I was met with a pretty decent interface, and slowly, this was already blowing my mind that this was still in alpha. You have 5 equipment slots for armor, as well as a few other slots for accessories and bags, and here you can see all the info about your character's stats, as well as your inventory. Afterwards, you're told to break through this door, and you're introduced to Dr. Galen. He gives you some food, which you can use through your action bar, and this stops your character from starving, and it increases your maximum HP, before you go into the next room in order to fight some pirates. Now, combat is pretty standard and basic in terms of action combat mechanics, but it works well and it feels fluid. The devs clearly aren't trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of combat, but I had absolutely no complaints. Even as I played more and more of the game, and it all became quite a bit more difficult at times, it never felt like the combat was holding me back. Defeating the next batch of pirates dropped me a couple of bandages, and these will heal you slowly over a period of time. For actual combat scenarios, you're much better off using potions, though you won't really have access to those for a short while. After you make it to the upper deck, you're shown a short cutscene which explains how your ship was wrecked and how you and Dr. Galen were kicked overboard, before finally loading into the actual game. You wake up stranded on an island, and this is Crosswind. Now we get a look at the full user interface, and as you can see, I'm currently starving here in my status effects. In the bottom left corner, you can see all your consumables, including potions and 3 options for food. There's also a mini-map at the top right, as well as some information about how to access different menus. As with any survival game, I started picking up stones and sticks and whatever else I could find. I first opened up my journal, which showed that I had 3 active quests at the moment, so it's not a complete sandbox in the way Valheim is. There is some narrative and questing and RPG elements to Crosswind. I also opened the world map, which shows very little information to start, as the entire world is clouded until you actually venture forth into that area. There's a discovery page which features the 3 currently available biomes: the jungle, the foothills, and the cursed swamp. And this shows all of the unique resources and items that can be discovered in each biome. So you start off with a saber as well as a gun, but you can't actually use the gun until you get both gunpowder as well as bullets later on. But your first objective is to craft a bonfire, which will sort of claim a bit of land as your own, and it allows you to begin building other structures. So I crafted a bonfire and ran around picking up some more sticks and stones when out of nowhere, this blue dodo bird came chasing after me and immediately 2-shot my sorry ass. I didn't expect to experience death quite that quickly in Crosswind, but this was hilarious nonetheless. Basically, you die and reappear back at your spawn, and you drop some items, but not all of your items, and definitely not the items that are currently equipped on your action bar. You can retrieve all of these by going back to your grave and grabbing all your stuff. So I went back and I killed the blue bird, but he had 2 buddies, and with 1 HP left on the last one, yeah, I died again. Anyway, now that the dodo birds were cleared, I was able to grab my items, and within a few more moments of gameplay, I had a workbench where I could make more complex items, as well as an upgrade table which you can use to upgrade your weapons, armor, and equipment. I made myself a stone axe and began chopping down some palm trees. I had to know if the tree actually damages you if it falls on you, and unfortunately, it does not. This is something I hope they change later on. Also, sometimes if a tree has already been fallen and it's rolling on the ground, it definitely does damage you. So it seems strange that it doesn't damage you when it's actually falling down. But yes, this is one of my biggest pieces of feedback regarding this alpha. Make trees dangerous again. Moving on, I made myself a cooking pot where you can cook different recipes, and then I made a pickaxe and began mining some stone. Afterwards, I was directed to make a shelter which would require plant fiber, which you can get from destroying small shrubs and bushes around the area. And voila, my shelter. Now, each shelter comes with a bed which you can use to set your respawn point, however, you currently can't sleep through the night, or sleep at all. Which I'm not sure is a mechanic they plan on adding in the future, however, it's something I'm sure they're definitely considering. While looking through my workbench, I realized I could make a torn sailcloth bag. And inventory space actually works a little differently in Crosswind, but it's in a way that I much prefer. There is no weight limit. So when your inventory is full, your inventory is full. By creating and upgrading your bags, you can get more slots. But different items stack differently. For example, you can hold 50 plant fibers in one slot, but you can only hold 10 copper ore in that same spot. Afterwards, I made a storage basket with 12 slots, which I fit into my small shelter. One important thing to note about Crosswind storage is that as long as your storage is made near your bonfire, they all act as a shared inventory. So you can use any items from any storage for any crafting or building that you plan to do within the area. Which is such a fantastic quality of life and makes it so that you don't need to keep track of where you put all your stuff all the time. I spent the next few moments grabbing about 50 or so plant fibers, which I turned into rough cloth, and I was able to use my upgrade table to upgrade all of my currently equipped armor. This would raise all of the armor from a power level of 100 to 120. Also, in order to upgrade my bag, it seemed like I would need 5 hides as well as 2 copper ore. Though I was unsure of how to get copper just yet. I also had a quest indicating I needed to find copper, so I decided to venture forth into the island and see what I could find. And luckily, within moments, I had found it. Oh wait, this is clay. Okay, well clay is probably useful too, so I mined some of that and continued venturing around the island. I figured copper can't be too rare of a resource, it's literally the starting metal in basically every game that exists. I'm sure it's just lying around the same way that clay and stone are, but that's not really the case. Anyway, I continued exploring. I saw a beautiful sunset with Crosswind's lovely Unreal Engine 5 graphics, and I found a new discovery, which was this orchid. I also regretfully didn't realize this at the time, but if you click Track Quest, the game will actually mark an X on your map, showing you exactly where you needed to go. In fact, when I looked at the map right here, you can actually see that X showing me where I could find copper ore. I'm just now realizing this while editing, and I feel like a complete idiot, because if I'm being honest, and you'll see, it still takes me a while to find said copper ore. Anyway, back at my base, I checked my workbench, and I realized that with the newfound clay, I could make a clay pot. Its description reads that this is no helmet. So I put the clay pot on my action bar and I pressed it, and well, it turns out it is a helmet. I am now a pothead. And next I died fighting some pigs. However, I also discovered leather in this process. I saw a ship out in the distance. These are Blackbeard scouts, and when you get to really sailing, I'm pretty sure you're going to want to avoid these guys until you're strong enough to fight them. But eventually I stumbled across where the X on the map was pointing me towards, and this was a cave. Inside I found a dead pirate with a map fragment, and finally, some copper ore. I guess copper ore can only be found inside caves, which makes sense to be honest. I'm just so used to these survival-like games having ores be randomly placed throughout the world, so it's more similar to mining iron in Valheim, where you have to enter crypts in the swamp biome to find it. I managed to mine a couple of pieces before I was attacked by a drowner, and I had to run outside. I carefully made my way back in, trying to avoid the zombie, and I was able to do so by taking the path to the left. You'll see there are areas which are poor copper rocks, and mining these will result in 1 copper ore. However, there are also normal copper rocks, and mining these will result in 10. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can only hold 10 copper ore per inventory slot, so I would be coming back here quite frequently, mining all the copper I could in order to make everything that I needed. So I left with my inventory full and made my way back home, and apparently Dr. Galen had found my camp, and he had a quest for me. Also, like an old college friend, he would now be a permanent resident of my humble abode. So I took a look through my building menu and I realized I now had access to foundations and walls and flooring, so I decided to spruce the place up a bit. Considering I now had company, it was important to set boundaries. So I made some foundation blocks with stone, and the building is pretty intuitive, it's pretty standard. I did have some difficulties due to the fact that my camp was on a bit of a hill, and you can actually solve these issues later on with a shovel, but I didn't have a shovel at the time, so I kind of just made this weird disjointed foundation that I didn't even finish. And after I put up a couple of stone walls and made the most pitiful awning you could imagine, however, technically, by standing underneath said awning, it was sheltered. I gained access to the rested buff, and I could also place workstations here that required being indoors to use. So this is my lovely home. Please, don't judge me. Moving on and looking through my building menu, I saw I could make a smelting furnace with clay and stone, which I would actually need to smelt my copper ore. So I went and mined some clay and stone and made my furnace, which would require charcoal to use, and so using clay and wood, I made myself a charcoal kiln as well. Here you can obviously turn wood into charcoal, but the process does take quite some time. But finally, I queued up a copper bar, which requires 1 charcoal and 5 copper ore to make. And after that, I built the armor and clothing workshop, which would allow me to create the Buccaneer set of armor, which had a power rating of 140, though I would need a ton of leather hides to do so. It was also precisely at this moment that I realized I had a button. I could press K to call my ship. So I did, and voila. What the heck? I have a boat. So I made my way over to my boat and I got inside and started operating it, and wow, I'm sailing. I definitely thought I would have had to craft my boat, but apparently you just get a starter one. Now, sailing in Crosswind is much easier than in Valheim, at least so far. While wind is a factor in your speed, it won't actually prevent you from moving. And I found the sailing to be pretty easy to control, though you'll quickly realize just how giant this world is, as it can take quite some time to get from one island to another. You'll solve this problem later on with access to fast travel and larger ships and systems such as navigation, but as of right now I just have this little sailboat, and it's slow. However, I decided I'm gonna check out what's over on this other island, at least. So I sailed for a few moments, and slowly but surely the island became bigger and bigger on the horizon. I found a set of ruins basically right as I got off my boat, and inside there were a bunch of pigs, when out of nowhere, I got completely wrecked by a big boar. So I respawned at home and I called my boat and I sailed back over to retrieve my body, which I did. However, I noticed something shiny and I tried to click on it before leaving, but then I was immediately killed by the big boar again. So I respawned at home and called my boat and sailed back over to retrieve my body, which I didn't this time because the boar was too fast. So I respawned at home and called my boat and sailed back over to retrieve my body, which I finally managed to do without being attacked by the giant boar. Please, if you have any mercy left in your heart for my boar-torn pirate character, think about liking and subscribing because it helps me out a bunch. Thank you all very much. Anyway, while back at home, while looking through all of the different things that I could potentially craft, from weapons to workstation to armor to upgrades, I realized I was just going to need a ridiculous amount of copper. So I made my way back to the cave and began mining. One of the first things I made with all of my new copper bars was a new weapon. You have the choice between 2 types of blades, one that would be a bit slower and deal more damage, and another which would be faster, dealing less damage. However, it also applies a stackable bleed. This bleed would stack up to 5 times and deal more damage over time. This was actually a complete game changer in terms of combat for me moving forward. With my new blade, I decided to see if I could take on that drowned zombie inside the copper cave in order to get access to some more of the cave. Inside, I actually realized I hadn't looted the dead pirate, and he had a couple of health potions, which immediately became very useful, as this drowned zombie was not necessarily the easiest fight. However, as long as I kept the bleed applied and otherwise kept myself guarded or dodged his attacks, I could basically just walk around and wait for him to die. So back at home, I made myself 2 pieces of the Buccaneer set, which was a decent upgrade over my original armor. And while looking through my workbench, I saw something known as a fast travel bell. So I made one, and this grants you access to a new building, a fast travel location which needs to be placed in water near a shore. In order to travel between 2 fast travel locations, you'll obviously need to make another one of these in another area. But I was pleasantly surprised to see this because I had originally assumed that I would have to sail basically everywhere. So seeing that fast travel was so accessible and easy to make, just requiring some copper and wood, I was pretty excited. Anyway, using all that hide, I made myself another piece of the Buccaneer set and finally upgraded my bag using my upgrade table. And this granted me quite a few more inventory slots. I still needed some more hides to finish my Buccaneer set, however, so I ventured further onto my starting island looking for more pigs. And actually, I came across a similar set of ruins to what I had seen when I sailed to that further island. Luckily, these ruins didn't have a big boar, and instead just had a normal boar, and with my new saber and my new armor, I found him pretty easy to deal with. Inside these ruins, I found some Senkamati chests. The first one had 2 great healing potions inside, and there was another hidden under some wreckage, which had silver ore and some schematics for decorations that you can place inside your base. And I found a third chest which had more silver ore and some sort of rare quest item. You see, every one of these locations on the map will have unique items that you need to find, and these go into a separate inventory you have known as rarities. This is where I had things like the map fragment that I had found earlier. They're mostly related to quest and story progress. Finally back home, I completed the Buccaneer set, and honestly, it looked pretty decent. I continued mining to the point that I had pretty much cleared out the entire cave of copper ore. I probably got between 150 and 300 copper ore from the cave after multiple trips. So first off, I upgraded my stone tools to copper tools, and there seems to be no real durability system in place, so you don't have to worry about repairing your tools or making new ones. But I think the upgraded versions do more damage per swing. Now, looking at my map, I had basically unlocked and completed every part of the starting island so far, except for this one hidden smuggler's cache right beside my base. I killed a drowner inside there, and I looted some chests and found another fast travel bell, as well as an empty oil lantern. And in another chest, I also found some gunpowder, so I could finally try and use my pistol. The fast travel bell was perfect because now I could sail across to the island that I had visited prior and place the new fast travel location in order to get back there quickly. I figured I had upgraded my gear and weapons and had nothing left to do on the starting island, so it was finally time to set out. So I made my way back across the ocean and placed the fast travel bell, and wow. I was pretty impressed with how seamless the transition was. Fast travel is free and basically immediate. And you can place these things all over the entire world. The only catch is they have to be in shallow water. Furthermore, back at home and using my workbench, I was able to use grease to light my oil lantern, which would stay lit for 3 minutes of use. It basically functions as a flashlight, which would be perfect for any future caves I needed to explore. Before going back to explore the new island, I first decided to test out my pistol, and it was slightly underwhelming. I also couldn't make sense of when I could use it again. Even though I still had enough gunpowder, I was only able to fire it once. Also, I finally built my alchemy table, which would allow me to create health potions and weapon oil, which would act as a temporary buff. But finally, I decided it was time. That stupid big boar had it coming. I bravely stepped into the ruins, and there he was. To be honest, I had no business beating him, but this bleed effect from my new sword was completely overpowered. All I had to do was make sure it was ticking down and then avoid the boar's attacks, which were not always easy. He can charge and stomp, and this boar has literal mechanics. But eventually, I got him down. He didn't really drop anything special, just more hides and tusks and in greater quantities. However, these ruins also had chests, and it actually kicked off a quest chain where I needed to explore this entire island. And inside these chests, I also found a shovel, which would come in handy very shortly. But my main concern at this point was finding another cave, because despite mining literally hundreds of copper ore from the cave on my starting island, the fact that you need 5 of them per 1 copper bar means that you use them up really quickly. So I started exploring this new island a little further. It was nice to finally really start opening up the world map a bit and getting a better grasp of where I was and how big this world really is. I came across another set of ruins, and this one was being defended by some undead. I thought I was completely cooked here as the undead bit me and applied his own bleed, but thanks to those health potions, I managed to take him out. I found some more chests here, and these included items known as Senkamati amulets, which under their tooltip says they can be sold at Tortuga, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the shared space in which players can interact with each other. It seems like the entire story so far is kind of leading you on this path towards Tortuga. It's not meant to be something you can access immediately upon creating your character, but instead something to work towards. Think of it like more of a late early game to beginning of mid-game accomplishment. A little while later, I did actually manage to find another cave. However, at this point, my inventory was so completely full that I decided to head back to base, drop my stuff off, and then come back in order to start mining some more copper. Unfortunately, upon coming back and entering the cave, I realized pretty quickly that this was clearly not the same type of cave that I was in prior, as there was no copper ore here. It seemed like another smuggler's cache with some other chests that I could loot, and I found some useful items like a weapon upgrade kit, which I could use to upgrade my saber, and some more silver ore, but unfortunately, no copper. Anyway, exploring the rest of this new island and all of its hidden locations eventually granted me a quest to find the madman's chest. It was around this point that I realized my quests were putting markers on my map for me to follow. And so I did. X marks the spot, literally. It says I should be able to find the treasure somewhere around here, so I used my newly found shovel to dig down in the correct spot, and there it is. Inside, there was a bunch of useful items, but also this marksman's bandana, which was my first piece of blue equipment. It had a power level of 200 and a passive effect that would increase my range damage by 4%. Not bad. Now, I couldn't find a way to get out of the hole, but luckily the shovel also has a raise function where you can refill said hole. So thankfully I wasn't stuck. But at this point I was completely hooked. I couldn't wait to travel to the next island and see what I could find. I destroyed my original fast travel bell and set forth on a trip to the next closest island. Here I finally found another cave, and inside, more copper, but also a ton of zombies. At one point, I almost got completely trapped inside this cave. I fell through the floor into an area with 3 zombies. Luckily, I was able to take them out, and eventually I was able to mine my way out, but it was a close call. With all of my newfound copper ore, I was able to build a disassembly table where I could disassemble all of my old tools, equipment, and gear. And this was really helpful because disassembling them resulted in a ton of useful resources that I could use for more crafting. Generally, it seems like these survival crafting games give you basically nothing for disassembling or recycling equipment. But in Crosswind, you get a pretty decent chunk of the supplies used to actually make an item back when you disassemble them. On top of that, I also built a jewelry station where you can make pendants and rings, and most of these rings require gems like sapphires and rubies, which I hadn't found just yet. But I was able to make a pendant which would allow me to recover from getting stunned in combat a little bit faster. At this point, I made another fast travel bell and decided to just set sail and really see how far I could go. So I took my little boat into the open sea, the wide unknown. I passed these giant mountainous landmasses, which I don't think you're meant to actually go on, as it's basically impossible to climb up these steep rocks. And then I sailed so far that I couldn't see a horizon or an island in any direction. In fact, I sailed for about 15 straight minutes without seeing anything, before I eventually decided to turn back. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, my little sailboat is not meant for going out into the wide open sea. This boat is meant for small distances between little clusters of islands. Actually, using this boat to try and go further distances is foolish because it's just too slow. Also, I was slowly realizing that I now had to sail back the 15 minutes I had already traveled just in order to get back to my base. However, after I had already made about a quarter of the trip, I finally realized something very important. You don't need to be at a fast travel location to actually fast travel. You just need to be in your boat. So I was able to open up my map and just fast travel back to my home base. So at this point, I wanted to find out how to get a bigger ship, and I figured the best way to make progress was to continue forward, traveling and finding new areas in the cluster of islands that I was already familiar with. Since I had another fast travel bell made, I sailed to another close by island and set up shop. Within minutes of being at this 4th new island I had traveled to, I stumbled across a pirate's hideout. There were 3 sailors hanging around outside, and they were not necessarily easy to fight. Luckily, my overpowered bleeding sword seemed to be able to take out any enemy I came across, as long as I kept my cool regarding dodging and blocking. So I took out the 3 sailors and made my way into the hideout, which seemed pretty much empty except for a cave entrance. So I went inside and I had to deal with a further 2 more sailors. Luckily, I was starting to get a pretty good hang of the combat at this point, and I was able to deal with them. However, nothing would really prepare me for what was to come. I interacted with these wooden gates and I was asked to choose a difficulty. Oh boy. There were 2 options, normal and insane. It said that 400 power level gear was suggested for the insane options, so I decided to just go with normal. And here we go, my first boss fight. This giant hammer-swinging pirate named Bossin had a few different attacks. He would do a bit of a double swing with his hammer, he would throw bombs that you had to move away from before they exploded, and he would also charge it. I only just managed to survive with nearly 1 HP a couple of times before I started to understand his rotation a bit. And as with any of the fights that I had been in previously, it was just a matter of applying my bleed effect and staying clear of his attacks. So somehow I actually managed to take him out on my first attempt. And after beating Bossin, the far gates opened and I entered a tunnel. Inside was a chest with some loot, as well as a pirate with a quest. He told me about their massive ship that was wrecked on the shore and needed to be repaired, and he also gave me the location of other missing pirates that I could recruit in order to have a crew for my ship. Furthermore, I also found a chest with a huge weapon upgrade, as well as a bunch of iron pickaxes, which I assumed I could disassemble for iron ore. By talking to that pirate, he had actually given me a quest to find and repair their old ship, and this is how you go about getting your first ship upgrade. So I made my way back home and I tried to disassemble the iron pickaxes, but I wasn't able to. I figured I might have to build a new item which would upgrade my disassemble table that I currently didn't have access to. And then I traveled towards this new quest marker and I found the giant ship. It turns out in order to repair it, I would need 100 wood, 20 cloth, 20 nails, and 10 rope. So I got to chopping. I gathered up all my supplies and made everything I needed, and boom. This ship is known as the Cutter, and wow, lined with its own personal storage and 8 cannons, I was really starting to feel like an actual pirate. The Cutter traveled way faster than my small sailboat, and I guess it comes with its own boost that allows it to go even faster. My next quest was taking me very far east in order to find these missing pirates, in which I would be able to recruit and take them on my ship as part of my crew. Apparently, sailing in Crosswind can involve other NPCs who will take over certain functions of the ship. So with my newfound cutter, I set forth sailing deep into the sea. I had a couple of close calls with other pirate ships, but they never really seemed to come directly after me. And I parked my ship at this new island and even set up another home here in order to craft a fast travel station. This isn't completely necessary as the cutter also acts as its own fast travel spot. However, I wanted easy access to return to any island that I traveled to. The new island, I believe, was part of the foothills biome, as the area was very hilly and had new plants such as aloe vera and tomatoes. I also found goats and some sort of offering tower in which I needed to offer up 5 bezoars. I remembered very well that a bezoar is found in the stomach of a goat. That's niche Harry Potter knowledge from when I was a child, somehow coming into use playing a pirate-themed survival game some 15 years later. Nice. Anyway, the goats are extremely fast and hard to catch, so I would probably need more gunpowder in order to actually get these bezoars, and eventually I made it to my quest marker, which included a giant pirate outpost. I noticed a few prison cells, so I think in order to get my crew, I would have to dispatch all of the bad pirates and free the prisoners. Unfortunately, I was no match for these sailors and pirates. They seemed to be on a completely different level than the enemies I had fought before, so clearly I needed to get a bit stronger before attempting to come back. However, with all that being said, I think I've played enough of Crosswind to give you all my first impressions. Now, just as a quick heads up before we get into this, I have zero incentive to shill or blindly praise this game. This is not a paid video, a paid opportunity. I was just randomly selected for this playtest, and I've been signed up for months. Note that I am not going against creators getting paid to document a new game. In fact, Crosswind, hit me up. I got you. However, I just want you all to understand that this review is my completely unbiased and authentic opinion about the alpha testing I just experienced, so let's get into it. I cannot believe that this is a free-to-play game that's in its alpha stage of testing. There are buy-to-play games fully releasing these days that have more bugs, more performance issues, and less content than Crosswind. I don't know if this is just some marketing ploy to make people sound really surprised that this game is still in alpha, but to be honest, after years of horrible betas or these early access excuses from developers as to why their game is never a finished product and yada yada, it's kinda nice to just have a game that functions well, looks good, and has very little issues in this supposed alpha. I am completely hooked, and I can't wait to play more. Genuinely, this is some of the most fun I've had playing a pirate-themed game in a long time. Now, here's what the game does well. All of its features, from fast travel to universal storage to simple but engaging sailing to quest markers and direction, you can tell they want you to understand and use this game easily. There is very little actual friction for when it comes to how this game functions. If something can be more convenient without taking away from the experience, it generally is more convenient. Which is an odd thing that seems to really be getting lost these days. It's like a breath of fresh air. Everything just sort of works how you want it to work. Furthermore, the graphics and setting of this world are instantly compelling. You're shipwrecked on an island with undead and zombies and hostile pirates. You need to make and craft your own shelters and your own ships and discover and find more and more, and the progress feels like it's well-paced. It's slow enough to make you want to keep playing, but also not so fast that it feels lesser than or cheap in any way. To be honest, I haven't participated in too many alpha testings prior to this. However, I've had access to what feels like a million different betas over the years, and I don't think any of those have left such a genuinely good impression on me as this alpha for Crosswind. If this is the starting point, then the only way to go from here is up. I had an absolute blast, and as this game is released to more and more players in the future and in future playtests, I hope you all get the chance to check it out. Anyway, folks, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who made it to the end of the video. Don't forget a like, a comment, a sub. Those things help a bunch, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider becoming a channel member. But I will catch you all in the next one. Later.